We're on.
All right.
How's it going, Keith?
Good.
Oh man,
How are you, Thomas?
this chair is definitely not podcast friendly. I'll just have to stand up, sit up straight. No slouching. Um, what's new?
Oh man. What's new is excited about podcasting number 2.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
me too.
excited about it. Yeah, yeah.
It's always better to just go for it. I think it's
Right.
easy. It's easier for me if I just do it instead of like thinking about it. So
Just do it.
yeah, just so I'm not thinking right now.
Uh-huh.
I'm just doing.
Right.
Yeah. Um, but you mentioned something about a new book you're working on.
Yeah, I had this idea for a book. I came up with the title. It's called A Gnosis for Gnostics, uh, an excursus with no excuses.
Nice.
And the no excuses part is because it's kind of going to be kind of autobiographical
Mhm.
to a certain extent. I'm going to talk about my dad, and I guess I realize that it's really hard to separate yourself from what you're talking about, the object from the observer, and it might even be better just to acknowledge that from the beginning and just to include yourself in the assessment of what you're writing about and let people figure out themselves how to
Mhm.
determine what's real or unreal or objective or subjective or I don't know.
So can you give an example? Like, what do you mean by that?
Um, an example of well, one of the things I want to talk about is um, I have a lot of things I want to bring up in this book that are not necessarily related to monad. I was going to name it after another Metagaia book at one point, and I still want to focus on Metagaia and these ideas that you and I have been working on. By the way, for those who don't know, Thomas, the man who's interviewing me, is actually he's the programmer for the app that we're building called Monad, and the last book I wrote was called Metagaia, which is related to Monad in the sense that Monad is a it's a calendar clock. It's an Earth-centered calendar clock, and I refer to it as a heart chakra of the planet. It's very complicated, and so a lot of these ideas are all tied in together, and they got my history involved in it. And anyway, it's going to be kind of a hodgepodge of a book. So I don't. That didn't answer your question,
It's okay. Um,
but
well, so I guess my question was more you were talking about subjectivity, objectivity, like including yourself, not including yourself. And so I wasn't really sure where you're going with that. So I was wanting to know like like can you be more specific around that part? Yeah.
well, this is a digression, but when I was when I finished my last book, Metagaia, I was dealing with my dad. My dad recently passed away, and I went to visit him several times, and I was reading a lot of books when I wasn't actively involved with him, and came up with a lot of ideas. And the subjective objective, one of the books that I was reading was on physics and just the whole idea of consciousness and physics in particular quantum physics, the idea that you have to look at holes
Mm-hmm.
and physics, the way that we've been approaching it from my understanding is that we've broken things down into parts, space and time and objects and things, and We're trying to figure out how they work together. And that was a very productive way of approaching things. We learned a lot, it's like Newtonian physics and all this. But then quantum physics came along, and we realized that these parts are really hard to get a handle on. They're very tiny, and they're instead of particles, you also have to approach things as waves, and waves are non-local, and also you have to account for the fact that there's an observer present, and the way that the observer sets up the experiment changes what you see and how you model things and your understanding of all the things that you're trying to understand. And so just the subject and the object, it's one of the books that I recently read, you recommended it actually, it's the Emergence of I. And that book is talking about how you have to actually start with the whole universe in a certain sense and work your way back. Mm-hmm. And I like this idea that we started with the parts and we were trying to reach the whole. Now we're starting with the whole and trying to go back towards the parts, figure out how they all fit together. And I think that balance of subjective and objective and from the in to the out, and I think that's the only way to arrive at a real truth.
Mm-hmm. And so that obviously is bringing up the bucket experiment.
Yeah, exactly,
and
right.
The work of Unzinger, I think it is, physics
and
channel,
Assis and yeah,
and Assis, and the like realizing, and Carver Mead is addressing it as well. This emergence of a realization that there is a continuous interaction between the local gravity, the path that an electron takes at a local level is directly connected to all of the other electrons in the universe, or all of the other mass in the universe in the case of the bucket experiment. And that, like, Unzinger is showing recent papers are showing, like, you can actually, like, there is actually work that's showing that a simple, like, the most intuitive or a most intuitive way of deriving the big G, which is the big equation for gravity, or the constant, the big gravity constant, is by including all the mass of the universe. So it sounds like these are examples of what you're talking about, of like,
yeah, exactly,
like starting at the universe level, like all the mass of the universe, and then including that at all times in the local, even the most local level. So solar system, so viewing the solar system as a whole in order to understand, or as part of understanding, what level of micro are we talking about? At the human level, at the planet level? Like, what is important about understanding the solar system as a whole in order to understand the smaller parts of the solar system, or what's the connection there?
Well, the connection is life in a certain sense. It's like we are humans and we are whole. Mm-hmm. It's something that we just know intuitively about ourselves. We seem to have like a boundary, the skin, but you really can't. Where do we stop? Do we stop at the skin or at the solar system? Where does life? We are alive as humans, and to try to fit yourself into a inanimate, seemingly dead universe or solar system, it's like most people, they think of the solar system as being basically an inanimate collection of objects with one unique planet, the Earth, which happens to have inexplainably growing on the surface of it this thing called the biosphere, which is a collection of living beings, which are whole. But it's then it's like the solar system is then part of this greater space that surrounds it, which is the universe. And it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to think of it like that. I can't somehow, it seems a huge disconnect between myself, this wholeness, and the universe as this infinity that just extends off into nothingness, basically. And it's all dead. And is there life out there? Maybe we're looking for it, sort of thing. But if you can say, okay, wait a minute, it's not just us that are whole. The solar system is a whole. It's alive. And in my book, Metagaia, I explain how you can see it as that, as a system where the heart planet, the Earth, is alive. It has these cellular beings on it, has a physiology, and it's connected to the other planets and the sun through their magnetospheres, which is a field of what I refer to as morphogenetic information. And all of that information is part of the wholeness of the solar system. It's alive. It's a photosynthetic organism, and it's breathing. The moon orbiting the Earth is the breath of the solar system, and the seasons is the swara, like we were talking about. Night and day photosynthetic cycle is equivalent to the light and dark phases in our bodies. If you see it as that, from that perspective, as a systems perspective, then you can say, okay, the solar system's alive. And then it's easy to speculate if the solar system is alive, why wouldn't other solar systems also be alive? All they need is a planet in the habitable zone with a 3-phase hydrosphere, and they could have cellular life growing on that also, feeding back information with the sun. And in other words, life is everywhere in every solar system. The galaxy would be alive on a greater scale, and the universe would have to be alive also at that point. And then all of a sudden it starts to be that this whole thing is alive. It's growing, it's learning, and we are part of that. We are significant. Our life is, we seem like we're just accidents according to most philosophies. But if we are alive, it's because we are the universe in a certain sense, compacted into these bodies, like the tip of a pencil, right? The pencil only makes a mark on the page, but it's a tip. We are the tip, but we're also the pencil, the whole pencil.
Well, so where my mind goes with thinking about the solar system as a whole, and especially when you said the galaxy as a whole, is consciousness, and in particular, my own personal experiences and just the many stories of other people's experiences of what someone called parapsychological realm or psychic realm or telepathy, but basically an interconnectedness beyond the physical, obviously. So it's a version of we're all part of one being, but at a very large scale. So, like for example, the Keros people, in their spiritual tradition, they connect with what they call, I think I'm probably butchering it, but it's in essence like the great sun or the central sun. And they don't mean the central sun of the solar system. They're talking about the central sun of the galaxy.
The Sagittarius 8.
Yeah.
And it's a black hole, actually, yeah.
And for them, it's like they're non-shamanic spiritual tradition, meaning they don't have drugs. It's all just a spiritual interaction that's brought about by maybe a ritual or but that's interesting to me because that is talking about a version of of a spiritual interaction with consciousness at a galactic scale, and then that obviously correlates with people's interactions, psychic interactions or spiritual interactions here at the Earth scale. Um, but to me, those types of areas are expressions of this idea of oneness or an interconnection that is beyond what a purely materialist perspective would be able to even acknowledge is possible.
I think it's related to gnosis. The idea that gnosis to me is an awareness of wholes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you know something. You know it. They talk about silent knowledge as opposed to intellectual analysis, which is where you're thinking about something. You have a system that you're doing, and you figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas gnosis, you just know, and you know it because you identify with it, and you can only identify with wholes because you are a whole. So I think you can be aware of the solar system. I think this is how the chakras, I think this is how people originally came up with the idea of chakras, because they actually identified with the solar system. And so they had this awareness that these planets are actually contributing to my body somehow. They are influencing my body. They provide the pattern for our body in a certain sense, is what I believe. But you can also expand that awareness out to what you're saying, the galaxy, and have awareness of things that you shouldn't be able to have awareness of somehow if you just rely on your senses.
Mm-hmm.
But if you rely on the fact that we're all interconnected through these holes, through the magnetospheres, and the an electromagnetosphere doesn't have like a boundary like a baseball, or it extends out to infinity. So there's all this information laden in the field that is available in a certain sense, but not in a conscious intellect sort of way that we're used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mentioning electromagnetic field, it brings up another aspect of this connectedness across time and space, because there's one line, there's a recurring line of thinking that consciousness is interacting across time and space at a more instantaneous level.
Yep.
And historically that was outside of what science was able to determine or validate. But just recently, there are these Nobel Prize winning experiments that have proven this thing, which is being called entanglement.
Yep.
Which is some kind of symmetry or interaction between, in the experiment, there's three, there's the emitter and then the two receivers, and there's some kind of interaction between the two receivers that's influencing how the wave gets transmitted from the transmitter to the receivers, that is only explainable with something that is happening faster than the propagation of the vector potential from the transmitter to the receivers. There's like something else there that science has labeled entanglement, but it's still kind of beyond what, like, I'm attempting to paraphrase Carver Mead in an interview he had on a YouTube channel. I'm forgetting the name. Maybe I'll splice it in later, depending on how much post-production we want to do. I think it's Demystify Sci is the channel. It's a couple.
Oh yeah, those guys are great.
Yeah, so they interviewed Carver Mead, and he did the best job for me personally so far of explaining the technicalities of that three position entanglement experiment and like why it's significant. But the way he explained it is like on the base level of what current science is able to explain, we can talk about how charge behaves. We can like explain, how different charges interact and, how electrons behave, but we're still not able to explain what charge is. And the fact that this experiment proves that there's some interaction or some symmetry or something between these 2 points that we can't really explain what it is. All we can demonstrate now is that there's something there, and our experiments are proving that it's there. But like what exactly it is still beyond, what current mainstream science has a theory for, which it to me is a validation that there's something there that is more simultaneous than what the electromagnetic field theory or what our current measurements of propagation of light through space is. The speed of light is the limit of that. But there's this some other layer of reality that is there also that maybe possibly appears to be almost steering or defining what electromagnetics are doing. Like how light propagates is potentially defined by whatever structure of this unknown other layer is, or the symmetry that's there or forms in some other process, or maybe degree of instantaneity than what we currently conceive of. And if that's the case, then what if consciousness is operating on that level of instantaneity as well?
Yeah.
Across time and space. And if that's the case, then that would explain this ability of someone to instantaneously experience something when a loved one has something bad happen to them and they wake up in the middle of the night and they're, or entanglement in a sense.
Yeah.
But maybe literally. I mean, maybe what science is just beginning to discover and is being called entanglement is beginning to discover this layer of consciousness, which is a form of entanglement or interconnectedness with this higher, bigger, more whole fabric of consciousness or reality.
When I hear what you're talking about there, you one word that you left out, which I'm sure you know about, is non-locality.
Uh-huh.
It's like entanglement seems to imply that things are not local. It's like where are these things located? They seem to be separate in space and time, right? But somehow they're not. And so our whole conception of locality seems to be in question here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like if you start out from holes, and if you then imagine, well, where did that hole come from? And I know you have ideas about the Big Bang. You're not a big fan of the Big Bang. But one of the theories that I've heard, which I think is interesting, is the idea that we emerged out of basically a quantum mechanical universe. In other words, this space where all the attributes of quantum physics, non-locality and everything, existed. And then it expanded away from each other, but it was entangled at the beginning. So it remains entangled as it spreads apart. And so things that seem to be separate are actually not separate. They're separate in space and time, but space and time are an illusion that occurs when you observe something. When the observer views, this microphone, then all of a sudden this is an object. Whereas before I observed this, is that an object? It's just part of this environment. And yes, it is an object. You can't deny that. You can take it apart and remove it. But really, where is this? Everything around us is one thing in a certain sense. And it's only when we define it with our words and try to talk about it and break it down into these systems where we can explain things, then it becomes objects. And then we have to say, well, how is this different from that over there? And
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think, to me, that brings up the philosophy that the mind is, or the conscious mind is a very small part of our overall mind, and that our, like in hypnotherapy, when I studied hypnotherapy, there's this idea that, what is it, 2% of the mind is the conscious mind, and then 98% is the subconscious mind.
Yeah. It's, yeah.
And so the conscious mind is very good at seeing differences, seeing light versus dark, or inside versus outside, or up versus down, all of the duality that is what our three-dimensional reality is defined by. But that the subconscious mind is operating on so much more, and past, present, symbols, symbols are kind of the way we communicate with our subconscious mind, which mean all sorts of different things, and not necessarily referring to a three-dimensional surroundings, but yeah, in a emotion oriented, or yeah, symbolic representation of the world.
Yeah. The conscious mind, I think, it's useful for our existence. We're walking around, we're moving things around, we're we're using things, right? So it's a very useful abstraction. But those things are immersed in the wholeness of things. I know it sounds, like I think we emerged out of what's referred to as a naive holism. I think people
Mm.
understood this holism, and they understood that the planets had an impact on us, that we were the world around us, and we didn't have the ego that we have now. And then, I think we're trying to come full circle back to not a naive holism, but a holism which incorporates the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to have those two things at the same time is our goal. And it's, like I said, I think until you can really understand that waveform
Mm.
of the whole universe, what is that? That's my goal, is to try to figure out what does that look like? What would a waveform of the universe look like?
Mm.
And I know it's a mathematical conception, but it's somehow the universe as a whole. You have to understand the history of it. You have to speculate on the history of it, because eternity is what space and time emerges out of, just like things emerge out of space.
Mm-hmm.
So what is eternity?
Mm.
Can we ever know that? I don't know. Maybe never, right?
Yeah, I I find the what is eternity and what is infinity similar to what is a black hole and what is the Big Bang. They're all, to me, in this domain of potentially eternal chasing of tails, or like
But you
getting caught. They're like, I call them intellectual black holes,
Mhm.
because you can get caught in them forever.
but you've studied them enough to know that you don't like them,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So in other words, even though you don't agree with them or think that they're real or right,
Mm.
you still have put your mind on them, trying to figure this something out
Oh
about
yeah,
this,
and
right? I mean, what is eternity? It's
I would not say that I think that eternity and infinity are wrong or not correct, or nor do I think necessarily that black holes don't exist, or that the Big Bang never happened. Um, I do believe a lot more in infinity and eternity than I do in the Big Bang. Let's just put it that way. Um,
so what would you replace the Big Bang with? I mean, you got to
yeah,
have something. I bet you have something, right?
yeah. So, I mean, I think where I go is that I think our understanding of the observable universe is just like the tip of the iceberg. And so, like, if you're only able to observe the tip of the iceberg, there's there's the uh, probability that you're going to come up with a theory that the whole of the universe looks like the tip of the iceberg, if that's all you're able to observe. And so, therefore, like, where did the tip of the iceberg originate? Well, it must have, originated from some smaller thing that we can conceive of rather than emerging out of something far larger and more eternal than what we can conceive of. And so, the Big Bang theory is a story or a narrative, aka a theory. A theory is an explanation, or a story of explanation. I know often some people, when I use the word story, they automatically assume it's like a false thing. I don't mean story as in like a fictional fairy tale or something. I just mean story as in the form if it's a way of explaining the data.
Yep.
But primarily, as I understand it, and granted, I'm open to being corrected. I do not know everything.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
Hear the truth.
But from my understanding, like, the story of the Big Bang originates primarily with the observations of spectral redshift from faraway stars. Edwin Hubble made the first kind of observation of, like, oh, it seems like things farther away in the universe are more shifted in the red spectrum, and he suggested the possibility that maybe it was due to a Doppler effect, meaning Doppler effect means the faster something is moving away from you, the more that its spectrum is shifted into the longer wavelengths. But he, as I understand it, never like took a stand and asserted that that was his explanation for it. He just thought, like, oh, it's an obvious thing to theorize or hypothesize. Let's put it that way. It's an obvious hypothesis. When sirens go by, or at least British sirens go by, they get lower in spectrum as they move away. But what if there's more? What if there's something else going on with light as it travels billions of light years through space? And and this is where I think it's significant that there are just like new emerging interest. There's this new emerging interest in the mass of the universe as needing to be incorporated in figuring out gravity at a local level, or interactions of mass at a local level. Is that there's this interesting interaction happening between the local and the macro. And, like, what if light traveling for billions of light years through this mass of the observable universe there's an interaction there that's causing the spectrum to get shifted towards the red in a form of decay, a form of loss of energy as it travels through space.
Oh yeah, right.
To me, it's a more intuitive, natural thing. It seems natural to assume that light traveling through space there would be some form of decay or loss of energy. So to me, it's actually less reasonable to assert that not only is there zero loss of energy in any way of light in the form of a redshift, and not only that, but that the universe is, instead of like looking at it from that angle, because that can explain, if you choose to look at it that way, that can explain a redshift without postulating that the whole universe is expanding. Because now, and if it's a nonlinear decay, meaning if it decays more, the lower energy it is, like that you would see a curve that would not just be a linear decay, but a drop-off decay, yep, which would match our understandings of physics in other areas. That would explain why the redshift is more extreme on a nonlinear level the further away it is. But instead of that, we're hypothesizing that not only is light not
It's slowing
redshifting
down.
for a
Yeah, yeah.
natural decay form, but is instead the universe is expanding. But not only that, the increasing decay is instead interpreted as the universe expanding at an accelerating rate. So rather than explore explanations that match up with physics in all other areas, we're coming up with stories like dark energy and dark matter to explain um, this expanding it. Well, the dark energy is the story that we've come up with to explain this. This it's like a story on top of a story. Like the first story is that the universe is expanding, which is the explanation for the redshift, the Doppler effect. But then to explain why the redshift is increasing at a nonlinear rate, we're then adding the second story on top of the first one, which is dark energy is this magical thing that's causing the universe to expand everywhere and causing the measuring stick to change over time so that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. It just, to me, there's not enough. To me, it seems like a decision. We've like latched on to one story and are just building a house of cards upon a house of cards in that direction. And
It's interesting that that story of the Big Bang, it's got a beginning and it has an end apparently, or something. Does it have an end?
I
But
mean,
it's
the
definitely got
end,
an end, a beginning, right?
the beginning, I would assume, like, I think the commonly held end is that eventually the universe will collapse back to a point
Right. And then
and
maybe
it
it'll
starts all over
rebound back
again.
again and some sort of thing like this. But it's interesting that we need a story.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like it's like you got to have a story, and the idea of, I think infinity has been avoided by most people
Mm.
because it's hard to accept infinity.
Mm-hmm.
Infinity is a scary thing to, especially if you believe that you are the universe, then you're infinite.
Mm.
And one of the things that I've been digging on recently is this idea of what's his name, Everett, the guy who came up with the multiple parallel universes, right?
I don't know very well.
Well, what's his name, Everett? Yeah. Anyway, one of the if you solve the equations of quantum physics, one outcome is that every time you make a decision,
Mm.
the universe splits.
Mm-hmm.
Which, when this idea was first
This must
proposed,
explain my resistance to making decisions.
right? Yeah, you didn't even know
I'm wanting to
consciously, but
spare everyone else a split universe.
well, the fact is though, it's happening. It's like in how the infinity involved in that is like infinity to the infinity power sort of thing.
Right.
It's like it's such an absurd concept when you first hear it. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then it works. So in terms of it answers the questions that quantum physics raises in a certain sense. And so people started to take it seriously. And when you do, it's like, to me, it's basically saying, to me, instead of the idea that there's all these parallel universes, it's the idea that there's parallel perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're making a decision to see this as a microphone in this thing, or maybe I see it as an ice cream cone in another one, and I'm insane or something like this. But it's like the universe is capable of accepting infinite possibilities, and it's a crazy idea. This is why we have things like the Big Bang, I think, because it reduces infinity down to a story that we can identify with.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't have that story, what are you left with? What in the heck's going on here? What is the nature of our lives in reality? It's like we make up gods. We've got all this to somehow give us a finite sense of, okay, I live, I'm born, I die, it's over, boom.
I think it also really that story, the Big Bang story, really resonates with our current paradigm, which I would say, like, the invention of the atomic bomb is like, on, in terms of accomplishments of science, is truly like a godlike power that has been discovered and harnessed. And I think I see this century as like the century of the atomic bomb in terms of scientific thinking. And it's the Big Bang Theory just like really resonates with that scientific mindset,
It's a
of
Big Bang.
like we've harnessed this like amazing power, like splitting of the atom, and actually it's reminding me of a quote of Baha'u'llah in the 1800s. There's a line he says where he says like, split the atom and lo, a sun is beheld, or something like that effect. He's basically predicting or prophesying the splitting of the atomic, or the atom and the atomic bombs 100 years later.
Yeah.
But and I believe that these are ancient technologies. Anyway, we can go back into the ancient stories.
I suspect you're right. We're not the first people to have access to this
Like
creative
apparently
ability.
out in Egypt are these big glass fields that look very much like the glass in Nevada that's caused by an atomic blast on the sand.
Just a coincidence.
Just I wonder where did
Weird,
those come from? Like, but where was I going? Oh yeah, I just think like the Big Bang Theory just really fits with that kind of nuclear age science thinking. It's very it's like very gratifying to that kind of like, we are gods, we've created this, we can harness this explosive power kind of thinking, to then also we've come up with this, we can explain the origin of the universe. It comes from this same type of idea, or the same type of process that we've harnessed. It's within our control, it's within our understanding of it, of what it is.
There's an interesting Gnostic thing going on here. It's like Gnosticism to me boils down to creativity. It's like you tell someone you're a Gnostic and they say, it's presumptuous to claim to be God, right? But God, what is God? God is the creator of everything, right? And so there's this idea that God, the big God, he created the universe out of nothing. And what is that? Nothing. What can you imagine? Nothing any more than you can everything, right? So to me, these are just words. I can't imagine that. So yeah, it's a convenient word to throw out there, but it's like I believe that the universe has existed forever. That's also equally impossible to imagine, I guess. But I think that one of the theories I've heard is that it's the inflationary universe, is that basically the universe is being recreated over and over again from black holes. So a black hole, on one side of the black hole, everything is falling into it. On the other side, everything's coming out of it, right? So it's creating a universe on the other side of this thing. And so there's parallel universes going on everywhere. And that is, it's mind-boggling, right? All of this is mind-boggling stuff. And it's, I don't know, but to me, these are the only questions that are worth answering. It's like there's, the fact that we're surrounded by mystery is a gift, right? It's like if you lived in a world where you didn't have mystery, you'd be a robot. You wouldn't be alive. You wouldn't. What would you do with yourself? I mean, I guess you could, do
what you were told. Do what you were programmed to do.
But to me, the beauty of life is trying to figure out these mysteries. And they're all fascinating to me, and I love all theories. I just don't know which one to choose or how to apply them all. It's yeah.
Freedom of choice. That's what we were given by God, our creator.
More than that, freedom to create. Every time you choose, you're creating the way that you see the world.
Which reminds me of a wonderful audiobook I listened to called one law, one truth, I am, I create.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it's a good one. Which and the subject of that book is really like getting in touch with your relationship with the creator, within you, your inner voice, that we and what's interesting about that book is it really suggests a choice between, like, a conversation between the little I of the persona, ego, self, I Thomas, with the big I, I am, or God. But then there's also kind of a spectrum in that of, like, you can also choose to have a conversation with your little self as the big self, you know
Holes
and
within holes, man.
and that various, spiritual, people who've renounced their individual ego have kind of like dedicated their lives to operating from or as this more collective I space, and so they're like, um and to me that kind of correlates with the great spiritual teachers of all time, like Baha'u'llah, for example. Definitely was he talks about this as being like a complete surrender of the individual self to this big I. It's like this isn't a selfish thing to to be claiming to be a prophet or a messenger or something as some kind of ego trip. It's very much the opposite. It's actually complete and total surrender of individual self and being completely of service, um, for the well-being of all. And um, anyway,
Yeah, it's not necessarily a sacrifice. It's almost a blessing, right?
well, yeah, and can be,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks, Keith, for a good conversation to be
Yeah,
continued.
that was fun.
Yeah. Resonance Radio.
We're on a resonance radio.
Resonance.org.
Amen.